Okay, so we're going to start off by considering cooperative breeding among kin groups. And the kind of the poster child for this is the Florida scrub jay. This classic study from the 80s, 1984. It's a really long and involved but very interesting and well-written study. I suggest it's very much worth a look. The Florida scrub jay is this beautiful blue bird which lives in there's a Florida scrub jay and a California scrub jay. They live in cooperative societies in scrub forest. And the thing about their habitat is it's very patchy, so there's kind of, they defend territories from other groups. About half of pairs have helpers. Helpers are offspring of the pair that have stayed behind on their natal territory. And they can be either male or female helpers, but the males tend to help for slightly longer. And the question is, why would you help? The first question that Wolfenden and Fitzpatrick asked is, what is the effect of having helpers upon breeding output in this species? And so they compared, they did a comparison between pairs with helpers and pairs without helpers. So they looked at, and they also looked at pairs that were breeding for the first time versus pairs that had bred before. So the slightly more helpers in experienced groups, but they found that without helpers, you typically have between 1.25, 1.75 offspring on average, but with helpers, you tend to raise more offspring, between 2.2 and 2.38. So obviously, the finding is that breeding pairs with helpers rear more young. Interesting. We'll come back to this later. But the helpers do two basic things. They help defend the nest against predators by kind of mobbing, etc. And they also help feed the nestlings. And that helps. They deliver kind of a third of all the food. The parents do it too. But one key thing key effect that has is to increase the lifespan of the parents, increase the survival rate of the parents. That's an effect that is called in the bird literature something called load lightening, which has a great big literature. We won't return to that, but it's an interesting effect called load lightening, the effect of helpers on parental survival. So it appears that helpers do help, but the key thing really is what's the benefit to the helper of doing that? It's that we've demonstrated an effect upon the parental output, but what about what's in it for the helper? So if you do the calculation, if the helper was to leave to rear its own young and form a pair itself, the young raised by first-time breeders without the helpers themselves is 1.24, as we saw from the previous graph. And if you imagine that you're related to your own offspring by 0.5, we'll calculate that in terms of genetic equivalence, so multiplying it by the relatedness. And so your genetic equivalent number of offspring is 0.62. The utility of doing that is going to be clear in the next step. Now contrast that with what you would get if you stayed behind and helped. So if you look at the effect of a helper, so the young produced with no helpers is about 1.8. The young produced with helpers is about 2.38. So the marginal effect of having helpers is about 0.58 offspring. So the extra young, if you've got an average of about 1.8 helpers, you've got that 0.58 divided by 1.78 is the marginal effect of you as one helper upon is the extra offspring produced by breeders that you personally as a helper can contribute. Now we want to multiply that by your relatedness to get the genetic equivalence to make this directly comparable with the number above. And you get, the average relatedness to the nestlings for the helpers is 0.43. So multiply that 0.3 by the relatedness and the answer is 0.14. which is clearly less than the genetic equivalent offspring you would have if you bred yourself. So, based on these calculations alone, if this is all you're deciding, then clearly a scrub jay helper would be better off leaving and setting its own breeding territory up. So why do they do it? Key thing is, that would be very nice if you could find your own territory easily enough. And this is where ecological constraints come in. Because in the Florida environment, in the scrub, Emlyn found that most of the breeding sites were already taken. So the environment was so crowded that individuals' offspring wanting to disperse couldn't do it. There's too much competition. And this is a map of territories where, you know, you've got A here and a subordinate B breeding, and then in 1970, and then in the following years, the individual B budded off, formed its own territory with help from its parents, and then C starts building up its own, wanting to leave, and then the following year, C had made its own territory here, and kind of territories are just kind of expanding, but individuals are kind of using the power of their own group to help them kind of bud off and make their own territories. But it's something which requires the help of your parents. You have to kind of stay behind and be a helper for a bit to kind of to build up the support to bud off and make your own group. So it's a process of individuals, helpers, kind of building up experience and gaining the help of their parents before being able to disperse and make their own territory. So by the end, 1976 over there, you've got 4 birds in 4 territories, having started off with only their parent. So the summary of this kind of case study is that it's fairly complicated. Young scrub jays remain at home because they'll survive longer. There's a very low chance of dispersal to a new breeding site. They need that help and that support from the breeders in their own territory to be able to bud off. But they can have an effect. When they stay, they can help, and they can have an effect upon the survival of their parents. They can increase the production of young of their parents, and by doing so, they increase the chance that they'll be able to bud off and make their own group later.